The Texas sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah McKinnon bent over the washboard beside the well, her calloused hands scrubbing the blood from Thomas's shirt.
She's mine!
Again, the crimson stains had become as familiar as the purple bruises that decorated her ribs, hidden beneath the faded cotton dress that hung loose on her diminishing frame. Sarah! Thomas's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a whip crack. Where's my goddamn supper? She glanced toward the ramshackle cabin where her husband's silhouette filled the doorway, whiskey bottle dangling from his fingers. At 28, Sarah still possessed traces of the beauty that had once caught his eye in Kentucky. But 3 years on this godforsaken ranch had carved lines of weariness around her green eyes and turned her auburn hair prematurely gray at the temples. "It's coming, Thomas," she called back, her voice steady despite the familiar knot of fear in her stomach. "Just finishing the washing. Now." The bottle shattered against the cabin wall as he hurled it with practiced violence. Sarah's hands trembled as she wrung out the shirt. The isolation of their homestead, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, meant no neighbors to hear her screams, no witnesses to Thomas's increasingly frequent rages. The Civil War had broken something inside him, though she suspected the cruelty had always been there, hidden beneath the charm he'd used to court her. She hurried toward the cabin, still dripping from the wash. When the thunder of hoofbeats echoed across the scrubland, Thomas emerged fully from the doorway, rifle in hand, squinting at the dust cloud approaching from the north. "Comanche!" he spat, working the rifle's action. "Stay behind me, woman." Sarah's heart pounded as 7 riders crested the small rise near their property line. The lead warrior sat his painted horse with fluid grace, his long black hair adorned with eagle feathers, a bow slung across his broad shoulders. War paint streaked his bronzed face in patterns she didn't understand, but his dark eyes held an intelligence that made her breath catch. "What do you want?" Thomas shouted, raising his rifle. His hands shook slightly. Whether from fear or the morning's whiskey, Sarah couldn't tell. The Comanche leader raised one hand, speaking in his native tongue to his companions. His gaze swept over the shabby homestead, taking in the broken fencing, the struggling vegetable garden, and finally settling on Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "We seek only passage," the warrior said in accented but clear English, his voice deep and measured. "Our horses need water." Thomas's face flushed red. "Like hell, this is my land, you savage. You and your kind ain't welcome here." "Thomas, please," Sarah whispered, sensing the dangerous tension crackling between the two groups of men. "Let them drink and go." Her husband's head whipped around, his pale eyes blazing with fury. "Did I ask for your opinion, you worthless?" The backhand came so fast, Sarah barely saw it. The force sent her stumbling backward, her feet tangling in the wet laundry. She crashed to the ground, mud and dirty water soaking through her dress as Thomas loomed over her. "Keep your mouth shut when men are talking," he snarled, drawing back his boot. The arrow whistled past Thomas's ear, embedding itself in the cabin wall behind him with a solid thunk. The Comanche leader had his bow drawn. Another arrow knocked, his dark eyes fixed on Thomas with lethal intent. "Enough," the warrior said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. Thomas's face went white as he looked from the arrow to the 7 mounted warriors, all now with weapons ready. Sarah lay in the mud, her cheek throbbing, watching as the Comanche leader guided his horse forward with subtle pressure from his knees. "A man who strikes a woman is no man at all," the warrior continued, his English precise despite the accent. "Among my people, such cowardice brings great shame." "This ain't your business, Redskin," Thomas blustered, but his rifle remained lowered. The leader's horse stopped directly beside Sarah. She looked up to find him studying her with those penetrating dark eyes, taking in her bruised face, her muddy dress, the fear and exhaustion written in every line of her body. When he spoke again, it was directly to her. "You deserve better than this, woman of courage." Sarah's breath caught. No one had called her courageous in years. She struggled to sit up in the mud, aware of how she must look, but unable to look away from this man who sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle. "Her name's Sarah," Thomas snapped, "and she's my wife. You got no call to—" "Running Wolf." The Comanche leader said his name simply, still looking at Sarah. "And you are not property, whatever this man believes." The moment stretched taut between them all, the only sounds the shifting of horses and the whisper of wind through the scrub grass. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by the crushing weight of reality. Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle as Running Wolf dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasined feet making no sound as they touched the hard-packed earth. The other Comanche warriors remained mounted but alert, their horses shifting restlessly as they sensed their leader's tension. "Step away from my wife," Thomas commanded, trying to inject authority into his voice. "I won't tell you again." Running Wolf ignored him completely, extending a bronzed hand toward Sarah. "Can you stand?" Sarah hesitated, acutely aware of the dangerous cross-currents swirling around her. Thomas's face had gone purple with rage at being dismissed, and she could see his finger hovering near the rifle's trigger. But something in Running Wolf's steady gaze gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. She grasped his offered hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused from years of handling horses and weapons, yet surprisingly gentle. Up close, she could see the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt and the small scars that marked him as a warrior who had seen battle. "Thank you," she whispered, brushing mud from her sodden dress. "You don't need to thank me for showing basic human decency," Running Wolf replied, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Though it seems such decency is rare in your world." Thomas took a threatening step forward. "Get your filthy hands off her, you—" "Careful." The word came from one of the mounted warriors, a younger man with twin braids and a fresh scar across his left cheek. He spoke in Comanche to Running Wolf, his tone urgent. Running Wolf nodded slightly, then addressed Thomas without releasing Sarah's hand. "My friend Swift Arrow reminds me that we came here in peace. We still seek only water for our horses and safe passage." "Then take your water and get off my land," Thomas snarled, "and leave my wife alone." "Your wife?" Running Wolf's voice carried a note of contempt. "Is that what you call someone you treat worse than a mangy dog?" Sarah felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. She'd seen Thomas's rages before, knew how they built and exploded. "Please," she said quietly to Running Wolf, "just go.
You ain't
It'll
taking
be worse
her.
after you leave if
She's
you don't."
mine.
The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Running Wolf's jaw tightened as he studied her face, reading the truth written in her split lip and the finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. "Come with us," he said simply. The words hit Sarah like lightning. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What? Come with us. Leave this place. This man." Running Wolf's voice was quiet, but certain. "You have the right to choose a different path." Thomas's roar of outrage shattered the moment. "Like hell she does. Sarah, get in that cabin right now." But Sarah didn't move. She stood frozen between two worlds, two choices that seemed equally impossible. Stay with Thomas and face more years of brutality, possibly death, or go with these Comanche warriors into a life completely unknown, where she would be an outsider among people whose language and customs she didn't understand. I can't," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You can," Running Wolf said firmly. "Fear is not a chain unless you allow it to be." "She's my legal wife," Thomas shouted, raising his rifle. "Under white man's law, she belongs to me." "White man's law means nothing here," Swift Arrow called out in heavily accented English, his hand moving to his tomahawk. "This is Comanche land." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could smell the acrid scent of her own fear sweat mixing with the dust and heat. 7 armed warriors faced one drunken rancher with a rifle, but she knew Thomas well enough to recognize that his rage might overcome his survival instincts. "If you try to take her, I'll kill you all," Thomas threatened, though his voice had acquired a nervous edge. Running Wolf smiled, an expression without warmth. "You are welcome to try." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a physical force. When she opened them again, she looked at Thomas, really looked at him, saw the bloodshot eyes, the cruel twist of his mouth, the hands that had brought her nothing but pain. Then she turned to Running Wolf, seeing something in his face she'd almost forgotten existed. Respect. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "what happens to me?" "You will be under my protection," Running Wolf replied without hesitation. "No one will harm you while you are with my band. And if I choose to stay," his expression grew grave, "then we will water our horses and leave. But I fear I know how this story ends." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her ribs, where Thomas's boot had cracked something the week before. She thought of the loaded shotgun he kept beside their bed, of the increasing frequency of his threats to put her out of her misery, of the slow death that awaited her if she remained. "Sarah," Thomas's voice dropped to the dangerous quiet that usually preceded his worst violence. "Get in that cabin now, or so help me God." She turned to face her husband, and for the first time in 3 years, she stood straight. No. The single word seemed to echo across the scrubland. Thomas's face went slack with shock, then twisted with fury. "What did you say to me?" "I said no." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I won't go in that cabin. I won't take another beating. I won't live in fear anymore." Thomas raised the rifle, pointing it directly at her chest. "You'll do what I tell you, or I'll put you in the ground right here." The metallic click of 7 weapons being readied filled the air. Running Wolf stepped protectively in front of Sarah, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Your choice, white man," he said quietly. "Lower your weapon and let her go, or face the consequences." For a heartbeat, Sarah thought Thomas might actually pull the trigger. She could see the madness in his eyes, the alcohol-fueled rage that had grown worse each day since they'd arrived in Texas. But even through his fury, some instinct for self-preservation must have penetrated. The rifle wavered, then slowly lowered. The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Thomas stood with his rifle lowered, but still gripped in white-knuckled hands, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. Sarah remained behind Running Wolf, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "You think you can just steal my wife?" Thomas's voice cracked with fury and disbelief. "You think there won't be consequences?" Running Wolf's stance remained relaxed, but ready. "I am not stealing anything. She chooses for herself. She's my property, legally bound to me before God and man." "Your God," Swift Arrow interjected from horseback, his scarred face showing disgust. "Among the people, women are not owned like horses." Sarah found her voice, though it trembled. "I choose to leave, Thomas. I choose to live." Thomas's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Live? With these savages? You'll be dead within a month, or worse." His pale eyes glittered with malice. "You know what they do to white women, don't you, Sarah? The things they'll make you do." Running Wolf's jaw tightened at the slur, but he kept his voice level. "Your words show the darkness in your own heart, not ours." Sarah stepped out from behind Running Wolf, her decision crystallizing with each breath. "Whatever happens, it can't be worse than this. I won't spend another night wondering if you'll kill me in your sleep." "You ungrateful—" Thomas raised the rifle again, his face contorting with rage. The arrow took him through the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the rifle flying. Thomas screamed, clutching at the feathered shaft protruding from his body as he fell to his knees. Swift Arrow already had another arrow nocked, his bow drawn. "You moved too slowly, brother," the young warrior said to Running Wolf in Comanche, then switched to English for Thomas's benefit. "Next one goes through your heart if you reach for that gun." Running Wolf moved swiftly to kick the rifle out of Thomas's reach, then knelt beside the wounded man. "You brought this on yourself." The arrow went clean through. "You'll live if you tend it properly." Thomas glared up at him through tears of pain and rage. "The law will hunt you down for this. Every ranger, every soldier, they'll track you to the ends of the earth. Let them try." Running Wolf stood and walked to his horse, returning with a leather water pouch. He tossed it beside Thomas. "Clean the wound. Bind it tight. If you're smart, you'll ride to town for a doctor." Sarah stared at her wounded husband writhing in the dirt, expecting to feel pity or guilt. Instead, she felt only a strange lightness, as if chains she'd carried for years had suddenly fallen away. "Sarah." Running Wolf's voice was gentle as he approached her. "If you come with us, there is no going back. You understand this?" She nodded, though her hands shook. "I understand. You will live as we live. Sleep under stars, follow the buffalo herds, speak our language. It will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." The words surprised her with their strength. Running Wolf studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. He whistled softly, and one of the warriors led a spare horse forward, a sturdy mare with intelligent eyes. "Can you ride?" Running Wolf asked. "I grew up on a farm in Kentucky. I can ride." Sarah approached the mare cautiously, running her hand along the animal's neck. The horse nickered softly, as if sensing her need for gentleness. "Please!" Thomas gasped from the ground, his face pale with shock and blood loss. "Sarah, don't do this. I can change. I promise, I'll change." Sarah turned to look at him one final time. "You said that after the first beating, and the second, and the 10th. Her voice was steady now, certain. "Some things can't be changed, Thomas. Some things can only be escaped." Running Wolf helped her mount the mare, his hands steadying her as she found her seat. The feeling of the horse beneath her, alive and powerful, sent a thrill through her that she hadn't experienced in years. "What about my things?" she asked, looking toward the cabin that had been her prison. "What there is worth taking?" Sarah considered this seriously. Her few dresses were worn thin and blood-stained. The books Thomas had burned in a fit of rage last winter. Her mother's wedding ring, sold for whiskey money months ago. The daguerreotype of her parents, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. "One thing," she said. Running Wolf nodded to Swift Arrow, who dismounted and followed Sarah's directions into the cabin. He returned moments later with the small framed photograph, handing it to her with surprising care. "Your family?" Running Wolf asked, noting how gently she held the image. "My parents. They died of fever before I married Thomas." Sarah tucked the photograph inside her dress. "They would have tried to stop me from coming to Texas if they'd lived. They were wise." Running Wolf mounted his own horse with fluid ease. "Are you ready?" Sarah looked once more at the ramshackle cabin, at Thomas bleeding in the dirt, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she turned toward the horizon, where heat waves danced above the scrubland, toward whatever future awaited her. "I'm ready." The Comanche band moved out at a steady trot, horses' hooves beating a rhythm against the hard earth. As they created distance from the homestead, Sarah felt years of fear and oppression falling away like shed skin. Behind them, Thomas's curses and threats grew fainter, until they disappeared entirely beneath the sound of wind and hoofbeats. Running Wolf rode beside her, occasionally glancing over to ensure she was managing the pace. "You ride well," he observed. "My father taught me. He said a person who couldn't ride was only half alive." The memory brought a sad smile to her lips. "Your father was a wise man." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Sarah McKinnon rode toward a future she couldn't imagine, leaving behind a past that had nearly destroyed her. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. 3 days of hard riding had brought them deep into Comancheria, the vast territory the warriors called home. Sarah's body ached from long hours in the saddle, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. The endless expanse of prairie grass rippled like an ocean under the endless sky, and she found herself breathing deeply for what felt like the first time since her wedding day. They crested a low rise as the sun reached its zenith, and Sarah gasped at the sight spread before them. A temporary camp of perhaps 50 lodges dotted the valley below, their buffalo hide walls gleaming golden in the sunlight. Smoke rose from cook fires, and she could see women moving about their daily tasks while children played among the horses grazing nearby. "Your people?" she asked Running Wolf, who had ridden silently beside her for most of the journey. "My band, yes. We follow the buffalo migration, so we move often." He studied her face carefully. "Are you frightened?" Sarah considered the question honestly. "Yes," she admitted, "but not the way I was frightened before. This is different." "Good. Fear can keep you alive if you listen to it wisely." As they descended toward the camp, Sarah became aware of the attention their approach was drawing. Warriors emerged from lodges. Women paused in their work, and children stopped their games to stare at the white woman riding among their returning men. The weight of dozens of dark eyes settled on her like a physical presence. Swift Arrow called out in rapid Comanche as they entered the camp proper, and Sarah caught the cadence of storytelling in his voice, though she understood none of the words. Several of the listening warriors nodded approval, while others frowned and spoke in voices too low for her to hear. Running Wolf guided his horse toward a large lodge painted with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. An elderly man emerged from within, his gray hair adorned with eagle feathers, his weathered face marked by deep lines that spoke of both wisdom and hardship. "My grandfather, White Eagle," Running Wolf said quietly to Sarah. "He leads this band." The old chief's dark eyes studied Sarah with keen intelligence as Running Wolf dismounted and approached him. They spoke in Comanche for several minutes, their conversation growing heated as other warriors joined the discussion. Sarah remained on her horse, feeling increasingly isolated as voices rose around her in a language that might as well have been music for all she could understand of it. Finally, White Eagle raised his hand for silence and approached Sarah's horse. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented but clear. "You are the woman my grandson saved from the white man who beat you." "Yes, sir." Sarah dismounted carefully, her legs trembling slightly from exhaustion and nervousness. "He tells me you chose to come with us freely, that no one forced you." "That's true." White Eagle circled her slowly, his gaze taking in her worn dress, her bruised face, her calloused hands. "Do you understand what this means? To live among the people?" Sarah lifted her chin. "I understand that it means learning new ways. I understand that it won't be easy, but I also understand that I was dying in my old life, slowly but surely." A woman's voice cut through the gathered crowd, sharp and angry. A striking woman in her mid-20s pushed forward, her black hair braided with silver ornaments, her buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork. Her dark eyes blazed with fury as she addressed Running Wolf in rapid Comanche. "Moonflower," Running Wolf said quietly to Sarah. "She objects to your presence here." "What is she saying?" Running Wolf hesitated. "She says I have brought trouble to the band, that white soldiers will come looking for you, bring war to our people. She says—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "She says you cannot be trusted because your skin is white." Moonflower stepped closer to Sarah, her voice rising as she continued her tirade. Other women joined her, their faces showing various degrees of suspicion and hostility. Sarah didn't need to understand the language to recognize the tone. She'd heard similar words from Thomas's friends, spoken about troublesome women who didn't know their place. White Eagle raised his hand again, and the voices died away. "Moonflower speaks from fear," he said in English, clearly intending for Sarah to understand. "Fear of what the white world has done to our people. Her husband died fighting the blue soldiers 2 summers ago." "I'm sorry for her loss," Sarah said, looking directly at Moonflower. "But I'm not a soldier. I'm just a woman who was drowning and found someone willing to throw her a rope." White Eagle translated her words, and Sarah saw something flicker in Moonflower's eyes. Not agreement, but perhaps a momentary softening of hostility. "You will stay in my lodge tonight," White Eagle decided. "Tomorrow the council will decide what to do with you." As the crowd began to disperse, Running Wolf approached Sarah. "I should have warned you it would be like this. My people have suffered much at the hands of whites. Trust does not come easily." "I understand. I wouldn't trust me either in their position." Sarah looked around the camp, noting how some people quickly averted their eyes when she looked their way, while others stared with open curiosity. "What happens if the council decides I can't stay?" "They won't." Running Wolf's voice carried quiet certainty. "How can you be sure?" "Because I will speak for you. And among my people, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for it." That evening, as Sarah sat beside a small fire outside White Eagle's lodge, she found herself the center of cautious attention. Children peered at her from behind their mothers' skirts, fascinated by her pale skin and reddish hair. Some of the younger warriors made jokes she couldn't understand, though their tone suggested they weren't particularly cruel. An elderly woman approached with a bowl of stew and a piece of flatbread, settling beside Sarah with surprising grace for someone who must have seen 70 winters. She spoke no English, but her gestures were kind, as she made sure Sarah understood she should eat. The stew was unlike anything Sarah had tasted, rich with buffalo meat and seasoned with unfamiliar herbs. As she ate, the old woman began speaking in Comanche, her voice rhythmic and soothing. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she sensed this was storytelling, perhaps meant to comfort or welcome her. Running Wolf appeared as Sarah was finishing her meal. "Grandmother Singing Bird says you have the look of someone who has survived great hardship. She says such people either become very strong or very broken. She thinks you are becoming strong." Sarah smiled at the old woman, who nodded approvingly. "Please tell her I'm grateful for her kindness." As the sun set and the camp settled into evening routines, Sarah felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. 3 days ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare marriage with no hope of escape. Now she sat beside a Comanche fire, surrounded by people whose language she didn't speak, facing an uncertain future that somehow felt more hopeful than any certainty her old life had offered. "Tomorrow will be difficult," Running Wolf warned, settling beside the fire. "Some will argue that keeping you here puts the whole band at risk. And what will you argue?" His dark eyes reflected the firelight as he considered his answer. "That courage should be rewarded, not punished. That you showed more bravery in 3 days than most people show in a lifetime." Sarah stared into the flames, thinking of Thomas probably drinking himself into a stupor while his arrow wound festered, thinking of the life she'd left behind and the impossible leap of faith she'd taken. "I hope you're right," she whispered. "So do I," Running Wolf replied, but his voice carried the weight of someone who understood that tomorrow would bring challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. Dawn came with the sound of drums and voices raised in morning songs that Sarah didn't understand but found strangely comforting. She emerged from White Eagle's lodge to find the camp already bustling with activity. Today would bring the council meeting that would determine her fate. Grandmother Singing Bird approached with a bundle of clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with blue and white beadwork, soft moccasins, and a leather belt. Through gestures and the few English words she knew, the old woman made it clear these were for Sarah to wear. "She says," Running Wolf translated as he approached, that you should dress as one of the people when you speak to the council. It shows respect for our ways." Sarah accepted the clothes gratefully, touched by the kindness. When she emerged from the lodge wearing the traditional dress, she noticed the subtle shift in how some of the camp inhabitants looked at her, still wary, but perhaps slightly less hostile. The council convened as the sun reached its midpoint, warriors and respected elders forming a circle in the center of camp. White Eagle sat at the northern point, his weathered hands resting on a ceremonial staff. Running Wolf took his place among the warriors, while Sarah sat where she'd been directed, just outside the circle, close enough to hear, but marking her as an outsider seeking judgment. White Eagle spoke first, his voice carrying across the gathered assembly as he recounted the events that had brought Sarah to their camp. Then, one by one, various members of the council stood to voice their opinions. Moonflower spoke passionately, her gestures emphatic as she argued against Sarah's presence. An older warrior with grey streaking his hair supported her position, speaking of past betrayals by whites and the danger of harboring a fugitive who might bring soldiers down upon them. But others spoke in Sarah's favor. Swift Arrow described her courage in standing up to her abusive husband. Grandmother Singing Bird rose with surprising vigor to share what Running Wolf later told Sarah was praise for her respectful behavior and willingness to learn. Finally, Running Wolf stood. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly as he addressed the council in Comanche, then switched to English so Sarah could understand his final words. "Among our people, we judge by actions, not by the color of skin. This woman chose freedom over safety, courage over comfort. She left everything she knew to escape a life that was killing her spirit. If we turn her away now, we become no better than those who would see her destroyed." The council fell silent as White Eagle rose. His dark eyes found Sarah's and held them as he spoke. "Sarah McKinnon, you ask to live among the people, ask to live. Do you understand that this means our laws become your laws, our customs your customs, that you must learn our language and our ways?" "I do," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Do you understand that if soldiers come seeking you, you may have to fight alongside us or flee into the wilderness?" "I understand." "And do you understand that there is no going back? Once you are accepted as one of the people, the white world will see you as Comanche. You will be forever changed." Sarah thought of Thomas, probably still nursing his wounded shoulder and his wounded pride. She thought of the life she'd left behind, the fear, the violence, the slow death of her spirit. Then she looked around the circle at these people who had shown her more respect in 4 days than she'd received in 3 years of marriage. "I understand, and I accept all of it, willingly." White Eagle nodded slowly. "Then let the council decide." The voting was done with small stones, white for acceptance, black for rejection. Each council member placed their stone in a leather pouch, their faces revealing nothing of their choice. When the last vote was cast, White Eagle poured the stones onto a blanket in the center of the circle. Sarah's breath caught as she counted. 12 white stones, 7 black. She had been accepted. Moonflower's face showed disappointment, but not surprise. She approached Sarah as the council dispersed, speaking in halting English. "You are accepted, but you must prove you belong. Words are easy. Living is hard." "I understand," Sarah replied. "I'm ready to prove myself." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning the ways of her new people. Grandmother Singing Bird taught her to prepare buffalo hide, to gather medicinal plants, to speak basic Comanche phrases. The work was hard, harder than anything she'd done as a farm wife, but it came with respect and purpose she'd never experienced before. Running Wolf became her patient teacher in horsemanship and wilderness skills. Under his guidance, she learned to read weather signs, to track game, to move silently through tall grass. More importantly, she learned to see the world through Comanche eyes, as a living whole where every creature and plant had its place and purpose. "Why did you help me?" she asked him one evening as they sat beside the river, watching the horses drink. "You could have just watered your horses and left." Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. "My mother was taken by Mexicans when I was young, sold as a slave. I never saw her again." His voice carried old pain. "When I saw that man strike you, I saw her face. I could not ride away and leave you to the same fate." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. The past shapes us, but it need not cage us. You taught me that." As autumn painted the prairie grass gold and red, Sarah realized she had found something she'd never expected to possess. a home where she belonged not because of law or custom, but because she had earned her place through respect and contribution. The nightmares of her marriage began to fade, replaced by dreams of wide skies and endless horizons. The test of her acceptance came when cavalry patrols began appearing in the territory, searching for a kidnapped white woman. Moonflower's fears had proven prophetic. Thomas had indeed sent soldiers after his stolen property. When Running Wolf brought word that a large patrol was approaching their camp, the band faced a choice: flee deeper into Comanche or stand and fight if necessary. Sarah knew the decision rested partly on her shoulders. "I won't be the cause of bloodshed," she told White Eagle. "If you need to turn me over to them, you are one of the people now," the old chief interrupted firmly. "We do not abandon our own." The confrontation came on a crisp morning in late October. Captain James Morrison led 20 cavalry troopers into the camp under a flag of truce, his weathered face showing both determination and caution. Sarah stood with the other women, her hair now braided in the Comanche style, her skin bronzed by months of sun and wind. "I'm looking for Sarah McKinnon," Morrison announced, "a white woman kidnapped by this band." "There is no such person here," White Eagle replied through Running Wolf's translation. Morrison's eyes swept the assembled people, passing over Sarah without recognition. The woman he sought, pale, frightened, dressed in tattered calico, no longer existed. In her place stood Windwalker, as the people had named her, a woman who belonged to the vast sky and endless prairie. After an hour of fruitless searching and questioning, the cavalry departed. Sarah watched them ride away with a profound sense of completion. She had truly crossed from one world to another, leaving behind not just a name but an entire identity that had never truly fit her spirit. That evening, as the band celebrated their peaceful resolution to the crisis, Running Wolf found Sarah sitting alone on a hillside overlooking the camp. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, settling beside her. "Leaving your old life behind?" Sarah considered the question seriously, looking out over the scene below, cook fires glowing like earthbound stars, children playing games she was still learning, the sound of laughter and storytelling carried on the evening breeze. "No," she said finally, "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to choose life over mere survival." Running Wolf smiled, and in that expression Sarah saw something that had been growing between them through the long months of learning and shared experiences, not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper and more enduring. As winter approached and the band prepared to move to their sheltered valley, Sarah McKinnon completed her transformation into Windwalker. She had found among the Comanches something the white world had never offered her, the freedom to become who she was truly meant to be. The woman who had once cowered in the mud beside a Texas homestead was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more alive. Under the vast star-filled sky of Comanche, Windwalker had finally found her way home.